The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of the Rosewood Hotel lobby, making the marble floors shine like glass. Vincent Blackwood stood in the center of it all, his expensive shoes clicking against the stone as he walked. Everything about him screamed money. The watch on his wrist cost more than most people made in a year. His suit was custom-tailored, and his smile was the kind that never quite reached his eyes. Vincent had just bought the entire hotel. The historic Rosewood had been a landmark in the city for nearly a century, but Vincent didn't care about history. He saw dollar signs, luxury condos, penthouses for the ultra-rich. He'd already planned to gut the place and start fresh. His friends surrounded him like a pack of well-dressed wolves. They laughed at his jokes, agreed with everything he said, and held up their phones to capture every moment. These weren't really friends. They were people who orbited around money, hoping some of it would land in their pockets. Vincent was in the middle of describing his renovation plans when something caught his eye. In the far corner of the lobby, almost hidden behind a marble column, sat an old grand piano. The black surface was covered in a thin layer of dust. Nobody had touched it in months, maybe years. The hotel staff had probably forgotten it was even there. "Would you look at that?" Vincent said, pointing at the piano. His voice carried across the lobby. "They just left that old thing sitting there. Probably doesn't even work anymore." One of his friends, a real estate developer named Bradley, laughed. "Everything in this place is ancient. That's why you got such a good deal on it." Vincent walked toward the piano, his entourage following behind. He ran his finger across the dusty surface and made a face. "Disgusting. This thing should have been thrown out years ago." That's when he noticed the old man. The caretaker had been sweeping near the entrance, moving so quietly that nobody paid him any attention. He was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his uniform was clean but worn from years of washing. His name tag read James, and he'd worked at the Rosewood Hotel for as long as anyone could remember. Vincent's eyes lit up with an idea. The kind of idea that seemed hilarious when you had too much money and too little empathy. "Hey, you there?" Vincent called out, his voice booming across the lobby. "Come here for a second." James looked up from his sweeping. For a moment he considered pretending he hadn't heard. But he'd worked in service his whole life. You didn't ignore people like Vincent Blackwood no matter how much you wanted to. He walked over slowly, still holding his broom. "Yes, sir? How can I help you?" Vincent's smile grew wider. He turned to his friends first, making sure they were all watching. Several of them already had their phones out, recording. This was going to be good content for their social media. "Tell me something," Vincent said, gesturing at the piano. "Do you know what this is?" James glanced at the instrument. "It's a piano, sir. A Steinway, I believe." "Very good." Vincent clapped mockingly. "The janitor knows his pianos. But here's the real question. Can you play it?" The lobby had gone quiet. Other people in the space had started to notice the commotion. A few guests sitting in the lounge area turned to watch. The hotel staff behind the front desk exchanged uncomfortable glances. James stood still, his weathered hands gripping the broom handle. "I couldn't say, sir. I haven't tried." "Come on, don't be modest," Vincent pressed, his tone dripping with false encouragement. "I bet a man of your talents has all sorts of hidden skills. Maybe you're a concert pianist in your spare time?" His friend snickered. Someone in the back made a joke about Carnegie Hall. The laughter spread. Vincent pulled out his phone and held it up, making sure the camera was pointed at James. "I'll tell you what. I'm feeling generous today. If you can play that piano, really play it, I'll marry you." The group exploded in laughter. People doubled over, slapping each other on the back. Someone whistled. Bradley almost dropped his phone from laughing so hard. "I'm serious." Vincent continued, playing to his audience now. "Show us what you've got, maestro. Let's see if those janitor hands can handle some classical music. Maybe you know some Mozart, Beethoven, or is it more of a chopstick situation?" More laughter. More phones recording. This was exactly the kind of content that would get thousands of likes. Rich guy makes funny joke with the help. Everyone would eat it up. James felt the heat rise in his face. Not from anger, though there was some of that too. It was shame. The kind of shame that comes from being treated like entertainment, like you're less than human. He'd experienced it before over the years. The dismissive looks. The jokes made at his expense. The way people like Vincent could say whatever they wanted because they had money and you didn't. But something else stirred inside him. Something he'd kept buried for 3 decades. His daughter's face flashed in his mind. Sophie. She was in the hospital right now waiting for surgery that would cost more money than he could possibly earn. The hotel was closing in 2 months, which meant he'd lose his health insurance. He'd been trying to figure out how to pay for Sophie's operation, how to keep her alive. And here was this man treating him like a circus act. The broom suddenly felt very heavy in his hands. Vincent was still going, feeding off the energy of the crowd. Come on, don't be shy. I'm offering you the deal of a lifetime here. Play the piano, marry a billionaire. Your daughter could probably use the money, right? I heard the hotel's shutting down. That's gotta be rough. That last comment cut deep. Vincent had done his research. He knew about the staff, knew they'd all be out of jobs soon, and he was using it for a joke. James looked at the piano. He hadn't touched one in so long. After the accident, after the doctors told him his hands would never be the same, after he'd lost everything, he'd made himself a promise. No more music. Music belonged to a different life, a different person. He was just a caretaker now. That was safer, simpler. But Vincent's mocking smile pushed something inside him past the breaking point. Without saying a word, James set down his broom. It clattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing through the now silent lobby. Every eye was on him as he walked toward the piano. The laughter started to die down. People weren't sure if this was still funny or if something else was happening. James pulled out the bench and sat down. His hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Dust particles floated in the sunlight around him. He could feel dozens of eyes watching, waiting for him to embarrass himself. Vincent stood behind him, phone still recording. That same arrogant smile on his face. James closed his eyes and let 30 years of memories wash over him. The concert halls, the standing ovations, the feel of the keys beneath his fingers, the life he'd left behind. Then he began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were soft, almost hesitant. James's fingers touched the keys like someone greeting an old friend after years apart. The dust on the piano seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. Then everything changed. His hands exploded across the keyboard with a speed and precision that shouldn't have been possible. The music that filled the lobby wasn't simple. It wasn't some basic tune anyone could play. This was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, one of the most brutally difficult pieces ever written. The kind of music that made professional pianists nervous. Vincent's smile froze on his face. The phone in his hand suddenly felt heavy. The notes cascaded through the air like water rushing down a mountain. James's fingers moved so fast they almost blurred. His whole body swayed with the music, decades of muscle memory taking over. His eyes were closed, but his hands knew exactly where to go. Left hand thundering out deep bass notes while the right hand danced across the higher keys in patterns so complex they seemed impossible. The laughter in the lobby had died completely. You could have heard a pin drop between the notes. Everyone stood frozen, phones still recording, but now their faces showed something different. Not amusement, shock, pure, absolute shock. A woman near the front desk had her hand over her mouth. One of Vincent's friends had lowered his phone, just staring. The hotel staff behind the counter had stopped pretending to work. Even the people who'd been walking through the lobby had stopped in their tracks. This wasn't just good playing. This was something else entirely. This was the kind of performance you'd pay hundreds of dollars to hear in a concert hall. The kind that made your chest tight and your eyes sting without knowing why. James played like a man possessed. His weathered hands, rough from years of pushing brooms and carrying boxes, moved with the grace of a dancer. Every note was perfect. Every transition flawless. The old Steinway, neglected and dusty, sang like it had been waiting years for someone to wake it up. The music built and built, growing more intense. Loud crashing chords that made the crystal chandeliers vibrate. Then sudden soft passages that made everyone hold their breath. James's face showed everything. Pain, joy, longing, loss. Every emotion poured out through his fingertips into those keys. Vincent felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. The old man was supposed to fumble around, maybe play chopsticks or some simple melody. Everyone would laugh. Vincent would get his viral video and they'd all move on. But this was something he hadn't planned for. Bradley, standing next to Vincent, leaned over and whispered, "Dude, who is this guy?" Vincent didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt tight. The music reached its peak. James's hands flew across the entire length of the keyboard, both hands crossing over each other in patterns that seemed physically impossible. The sound filled every corner of the massive lobby. It bounced off the marble walls and the high ceiling, creating layers upon layers of beautiful noise. Then, slowly, it began to quiet. The storm passed. The notes became gentler, sadder. Like someone saying goodbye, James played the final phrase with such tenderness that several people in the crowd had tears streaming down their faces without realizing it. The last note hung in the air. James's hands remained on the keys for a moment, then slowly lifted. The silence that followed was deafening. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The moment felt sacred, like they'd all just witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. Then someone started clapping. Slow at first, a woman in a business suit near the elevators. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire lobby erupted in applause. Not polite clapping. Real applause. The kind that makes your hands hurt. People were cheering, whistling, some were crying openly. The hotel staff had come out from behind the desk. Even the cook had emerged from the restaurant kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, clapping until his palms turned red. James stood up from the piano bench slowly, like he was coming out of a dream. His legs felt shaky. He hadn't played like that in 30 years. His hands were trembling now, but not from nerves, from the sheer physical effort of what he'd just done. Vincent stood there, his phone still pointed at James, but he'd stopped recording minutes ago. His face had gone pale. Around him, his friends weren't laughing anymore. They were clapping too, caught up in the moment despite themselves. An elderly woman pushed through the crowd. She was small, maybe in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a bun. She wore an elegant pantsuit and moved with purpose. Her eyes were wet with tears. "James?" she said, her voice shaking. "James Chen? Is that really you?" James turned to face her. Recognition flickered across his face. "Mrs. Vasquez?" "Oh my God," she breathed. "It is you. After all these years." The crowd pressed closer, sensing something important was happening. Vincent's assistant, a sharp young woman named Christine, was frantically typing on her tablet. Her eyes kept getting wider as she scrolled. Mrs. Vasquez reached out and took James's hands in hers. "The whole world thought you were dead. After the accident, you just disappeared. We searched for you. Your friends, your colleagues, everyone." "What accident?" someone in the crowd called out. Mrs. Vasquez turned to address everyone, though tears still ran down her face. "This man isn't a caretaker. Well, he is now, but..." She looked back at James. "He was supposed to be the greatest pianist of his generation." Christine thrust her tablet toward Vincent. "Sir, you need to see this." On the screen were dozens of articles. Old newspaper clippings, magazine covers, concert reviews, all featuring a much younger James. The headlines told a story. Child prodigy takes classical world by storm. James Chen, 16, youngest graduate in Juilliard history. Chen wins Van Cliburn competition. The future of classical piano. Then the articles changed tone. Rising star James Chen injured in tragic accident. Pianist's wife killed, career in question. Where is James Chen? After that, nothing. The articles just stopped, like he'd vanished from the face of the earth. Vincent scrolled through the images. There was young James on stage at Carnegie Hall, bowing to a standing ovation. James shaking hands with the president. James on the cover of Time magazine with the headline, "The Next Great Maestro." "I don't understand," Bradley said, looking between the tablet and the old man in the caretaker uniform. "If he was famous, why is he working here?" Mrs. Vasquez still held James's hands. "What happened to you?" "The accident was in 1995. The paper said your hands were badly injured, that you'd lost your wife. Then you disappeared. We all assumed that I was dead," James finished quietly. It felt that way for a long time. The crowd had grown. Hotel guests from the upper floors had come down to see what the commotion was about. People from the street had wandered in, drawn by the music. James looked at his hands. They were shaking now, but steady enough. "The doctors told me I'd never play again. The nerves in my left hand were damaged. My wife died in the crash, and I was left with a 2-year-old daughter to raise alone. Music seemed like something from another life. So I let it die. I needed to survive. To provide. This hotel gave me a job when I had nothing, when no one else would hire me. But you just played Rachmaninoff's Third. Mrs. Vasquez said, her voice full of wonder. That's considered one of the most difficult pieces in the entire classical repertoire. Your hands are fine, James smiled sadly. Time heals some things. But by the time my hands recovered enough, I'd already convinced myself I was just a caretaker. It was easier that way, safer. No expectations, no pressure. Just work, earn money, raise my daughter. Vincent felt like the floor was tilting under his feet. He looked down at his phone, at the video he'd recorded. The beginning showed him mocking this man, making jokes, promising to marry him if he could play. The audio captured his friends laughing, his condescending tone. The rest of the video showed exactly what everyone had just witnessed. A virtuoso performance by a master. Sir, Christine whispered urgently. This is already online. Someone else uploaded their video. It's spreading fast. Vincent looked at her tablet again. She was right. Multiple videos from different angles were already posted. The comments were rolling in by the hundreds. Who is this guy? That's James Chen. Look him up. He was legendary. The way that rich guy was mocking him at the start is disgusting. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Vincent's face burned. His joke, his moment of cruelty, was about to be seen by millions of people. And he was going to be the villain in the story. The lobby had turned into something like a street festival. People weren't leaving. More kept arriving. Someone had set up their phone to live stream the whole thing. The view count was climbing into the thousands, then tens of thousands. Vincent stood frozen in the middle of it all, watching his carefully crafted image crumble in real time. His assistant Christine kept showing him updates. The videos were everywhere now. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, every platform, and they all started the same way. With him making that joke. With him mocking an old man in a caretaker's uniform. If you can play that piano, I'll marry you, his recorded voice said over and over. Across 1,000 different screens, the comments were brutal. Imagine being this cruel to someone just trying to do their job. Rich people really think they're better than everyone else. This man has more talent in his pinky than this billionaire has in his entire body. I hope this goes viral and ruins him. Vincent felt sick. He'd built his entire fortune on his image. The smart young tech genius. The disruptor. The guy who could do no wrong. He had millions of followers who watched his every move. Companies paid him to show up at their events. His opinion moved markets, and now in less than an hour, he'd become the villain in a story that was spreading across the internet like wildfire. Mrs. Vasquez was still talking with James, catching up on 30 years of lost time. Other people from the crowd had questions. A young music student wanted to know if he'd give lessons. A journalist asked if she could interview him. Someone asked for an autograph. James looked overwhelmed. He kept glancing toward the broom he'd left leaning against the wall, like he wanted to pick it up and disappear back into his normal life. Vincent's phone rang. It was his publicist, Daniel. He answered, already knowing what was coming. Tell me you didn't do what I'm seeing in these videos, Daniel said without greeting. It was just a joke, Vincent said weakly. A joke? Vincent, this is a disaster. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. News outlets want statements. Your board members are calling emergency meetings. Do you understand what's happening here? Vincent looked around the lobby. At James, surrounded by admirers. At the people still recording. At his own friends who had quietly started backing away from him, suddenly very interested in their phones. I messed up, Vincent admitted quietly. That's the understatement of the century, Daniel said. We need damage control now. I'm coming over. The call ended. Vincent stood there feeling more alone than he'd felt in years. All these people around him, and he might as well have been invisible. Bradley sidled up next to him. Listen, man, I've got a meeting I forgot about. I should probably head out. Right, Vincent said flatly. Sure. One by one, his friends made excuses and left. They'd been happy to orbit around him when he was on top. But the second there was trouble, they scattered like roaches when the lights turned on. Christine stayed, though. She was typing furiously on her tablet, already working on statements and responses. We need to get ahead of this, she muttered. Maybe a public apology? A donation to a music charity? Something to show you're not actually what? Vincent interrupted. A person who mocks elderly workers for fun? Because that's exactly what I did. She looked up at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. Vincent walked closer to where James stood. He waited until there was a break in the conversation. James turned and their eyes met. The old man's expression wasn't angry. It was just tired. Like he'd seen this kind of behavior before and had long ago stopped being surprised by it. "Mr. Chen," Vincent said. His voice came out smaller than intended. "I owe you an apology." The crowd went quiet. Phones turned toward them again. "What I said to you was cruel and unnecessary. I made fun of you because I thought it would be entertaining, because I didn't see you as a person, just as someone beneath me." Vincent paused, the words sticking in his throat. "I was wrong. Completely wrong. And I'm sorry." James studied him for a long moment. "Thank you for saying that. It doesn't make it right." "No," James agreed. "It doesn't, but at least you said it." Mrs. Vasquez stepped forward. "James, you need to play again, professionally. The world deserves to hear you." "I have responsibilities," James said. "My daughter—" "Speaking of which, your daughter's been calling." One of the hotel desk clerks interrupted, holding up a phone. "She says it's urgent." James's face went pale. He took the phone and moved away from the crowd, pressing it to his ear. Vincent watched as the color drained further from the old man's face. His shoulders slumped. Whatever he was hearing, it wasn't good news. When James came back, he looked 10 years older. His hands were shaking as he handed the phone back. "Is everything okay?" Mrs. Vasquez asked, touching his arm. James shook his head. "That was the hospital. My daughter, Sophie, she needs surgery." They moved the date up. "Her condition's gotten worse." His voice cracked. "They need $340,000. By the end of the week," the crowd murmured. Mrs. Vasquez's hand flew to her mouth. "I don't have that kind of money," James continued, more to himself than anyone else. "I've been saving for years, but it's not enough. Not even close. And with the hotel closing, I'm losing my insurance. I thought I had more time to figure something out, but—" He trailed off, looking lost. This man who'd just played the performance of a lifetime looked completely defeated. Because what good was talent when your daughter was dying and you couldn't save her? Vincent felt something twist in his chest. A feeling he wasn't used to. Actual, genuine guilt. Not the performative kind he'd show for the cameras. Real guilt that made him feel physically ill. He thought about his own father. A man he barely knew. A man who'd been too busy building his business empire to attend Vincent's school plays or baseball games. Who'd taught him that money was the only thing that mattered. That people were either useful or they weren't. Vincent had become exactly like him. Maybe worse. Here was James Chen. A man who'd given up everything for his daughter. Who'd sacrificed a brilliant career to work as a caretaker. Swallowing his pride day after day. Just to keep a roof over her head and food on the table. Who'd let the world think he was dead because it was easier than admitting he'd failed. And what had Vincent sacrificed? Nothing. He'd been handed a trust fund and multiplied it. He'd stepped on people to get higher. He'd made jokes at the expense of those who couldn't fight back. Christine was pulling at his sleeve. "Sir, we should go. The press will be here soon. We need to prepare a statement," but Vincent wasn't listening. He was thinking about the number James had said. $340,000. To Vincent, that was nothing. He'd spent more than that on his car. He'd dropped that much on a watch he wore twice. It was pocket change, but to James it was impossible. It was the difference between his daughter living or dying. "Mr. Chen," Vincent said. James looked at him with empty eyes. "How old is your daughter?" 28. "She's an engineer. MIT graduate. Brilliant girl." James smiled sadly. "Everything I gave up was worth it to give her a chance at a good life. And now I can't even save her." Vincent pulled out his phone. Christine made a noise of protest, probably thinking he was about to do something stupid. She was right. He opened his banking app and started a transfer. His hands hesitated over the screen, not because he was reconsidering, but because he was thinking about what came next. An idea was forming, something that might actually mean something. "What hospital is she at?" Vincent asked. James blinked, confused. "St. Mary's, why?" "And her full name?" "Sophie Chen. But I don't understand." Vincent finished the transfer. $340,000. Sent directly to St. Mary's Hospital with Sophie Chen's name in the memo. He showed James the screen. James stared at it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "The surgery's covered," Vincent said simply. The lobby erupted. People were shouting, crying, applauding again. Mrs. Vasquez had tears streaming down her face. Christine looked like she might faint, but Vincent held up his hand. "I'm not done." The crowd quieted. That money comes with conditions, Vincent said, looking directly at James. You have to promise me something. James stared at Vincent, barely breathing. The phone screen still showed the transfer confirmation. $340,000. His daughter's life saved with a few taps on a screen. What conditions? James asked, his voice hoarse. Vincent took a breath. The entire lobby waited. Phones were still recording. This moment would be seen by millions, just like his mockery had been. But this time he didn't care about the cameras. You have to go back to music, Vincent said. Really go back. Not just playing in lobbies. I want you to record an album. Perform in concert halls. Teach at a conservatory. Share what you can do with the world. James shook his head. I can't accept this. It's too much. I don't deserve— Stop, Vincent interrupted. Don't say you don't deserve it. You gave up everything for your daughter. You worked jobs that were beneath your talent. You let yourself become invisible. And when I tried to humiliate you, you responded with grace and dignity I don't possess. He paused. If anyone doesn't deserve something here, it's me. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but maybe I can earn it. The crowd was silent. Some people had put their phones down, too caught up in the moment to remember to record. Mrs. Vasquez stepped closer. James, he's right. The world needs to hear you play. I've spent 50 years reviewing concerts and I've never heard anything like what you just did. Not from anyone. But Sophie needs me, James protested. She's going to need care after the surgery. I can't just leave her to go chase some dream. I'm adding another $500,000 to the transfer, Vincent said, already typing on his phone. For her recovery. For living expenses. Whatever she needs. And you'll have a salary. A real one. Not caretaker wages. Christine had finally found her voice. Sir, that's almost $1 million total. The board is going to— I don't care what the board thinks, Vincent said flatly. This is my money. I can do what I want with it. James's legs seemed to give out. He sat down heavily on the piano bench. His face was in his hands. His shoulders shook. The tough old man who'd worked every day for decades without complaint was crying. Mrs. Vasquez sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders. The crowd gave them space, backing up a few feet. Even in this age of constant recording, some moments felt too private to intrude on. After a long minute, James looked up. His eyes were red but clear. Why are you doing this? Real reason? Not for the cameras. Not to fix your image. Why? Vincent considered lying. It would be easy. Say something about giving back, about redemption, about second chances. All the things that would sound good in a press release, but James deserved the truth. Because you humbled me, Vincent said quietly. I've spent my whole life believing that money made me better than other people. That success meant I could treat people however I wanted. My father taught me that. He was never there when I needed him because he was too busy making money. And I became exactly like him. He looked around the lobby at all the faces watching. I bought this hotel because I saw dollar signs. I didn't think about the people who worked here. The lives that would be disrupted. You've worked here for 40 years, and I was going to throw you out without a second thought, then make fun of you on top of it. Vincent's voice cracked slightly. You could have made me look like a fool. You could have embarrassed me in front of everyone. But you didn't. You just played. You did what you do best and you let that speak for itself. That's dignity. That's grace. That's everything I'm not. He turned back to James. I can't undo what I said. I can't take back how I've treated people my whole life. But maybe I can start doing something different. Something that actually matters. James studied him for a long moment. Then he stood up and extended his hand. Okay. I'll do it. I'll go back to music. On one condition of my own. Name it, Vincent said. You have to mean this. Really mean it. Because if you're just doing this for your image, if this is just damage control, I'll give every penny back. I'd rather lose my daughter than be part of some billionaire's PR stunt. The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. But James wasn't done. Money doesn't make you a good person, James continued. Generosity doesn't erase cruelty. If you want to change, actually change, you have to do more than write a check. You have to look at how you treat people when the cameras aren't on, how you talk to servers in restaurants, how you interact with people you think can't do anything for you. That's where character lives. In the small moments. Vincent nodded slowly. You're right. And I don't know if I can change. Not really. But I want to try. James shook his hand. Then we have a deal. The lobby erupted in applause again. But it felt different this time. Not like they were watching a performance. More like they were witnessing something real, something that mattered. Christine was already on her phone making arrangements. I'll set up meetings with the best music producers. And we'll need to find concert venues. Carnegie Hall would be perfect for a comeback performance. Oh, and we should reach out to the major streaming platforms for the album distribution. Slow down, James said, holding up his hand. First, I need to go see my daughter. Tell her the surgery's covered, that she's going to be okay. Of course, Vincent said. Take all the time you need. We'll figure out the details later. Mrs. Vasquez was already planning too. I'll make calls. I still know people at Juilliard at the conservatories. They'll be thrilled to have you. And I'll write about this. The world needs to know James Chen is back. People started to disperse, though many lingered, still talking about what they'd witnessed. The hotel staff returned to their posts, but they kept glancing over at James with new respect. He wasn't just the quiet caretaker anymore. He was someone special. He always had been. James picked up his broom from where it leaned against the wall. Vincent watched him, confused. What are you doing? Vincent asked. Finishing my shift, James said simply. I made a commitment to this hotel. Just because my life is changing doesn't mean I abandon my responsibilities. He started sweeping again, pushing the broom across the marble floor with the same careful attention he'd always shown. Vincent watched him work, this man who'd just played like an angel and who was about to become famous again, still doing his job with dignity. Can I help? Vincent asked. James stopped sweeping and looked at him. You want to help me clean? I own the place now. Might as well learn what actually goes into maintaining it. A small smile crossed James's face. Sure. Mop's in the closet over there. And so Vincent Blackwood, billionaire tech mogul, spent the next hour mopping floors alongside a caretaker. Christine watched in disbelief, her tablet hanging forgotten in her hands. Some of the remaining crowd took pictures, but they were different kinds of pictures now. Not mocking, not sensational. Just documenting something unusual and strangely hopeful. When they finished, James showed Vincent how to properly store the cleaning supplies. How to organize the closet so everything was easy to find for the next shift. Small things that Vincent had never thought about. The invisible work that kept the world running. Thank you, James said as they walked back toward the lobby. For what? I'm the one who should be thanking you. For treating me like a person today, James said. After everything, you could have just thrown money at the problem and walked away. But you stayed. You listened. You mopped floors. That matters more than you know. Vincent's phone buzzed. It was Daniel, his publicist. Probably calling about damage control again. Vincent ignored it. I have a question, Vincent said. You told me the surgery cost $340,000. But I sent you $840,000 total. What are you going to do with the extra money? James thought for a moment. There are other caretakers here. Other staff losing their jobs when this place closes. Maybe some of them have sick kids too, or medical bills they can't pay, or just need help getting back on their feet while they find new work. You want to give it away? I spent 30 years learning that money doesn't matter as much as people think it does. What matters is taking care of each other, showing up, being there when it counts. Vincent felt something shift inside him, some hard, cynical part that had been there so long he'd forgotten it wasn't supposed to be there. What if we did more than that? Vincent said slowly, an idea forming. What if we created something permanent? A foundation for people like you. Artists who had to give up their dreams. People with talent who need a second chance. James's eyes widened. That would be incredible, but it would take a lot of money. I have a lot of money, Vincent said, and for the first time in my life I think I might actually use it for something good. 3 months passed like a dream James kept expecting to wake up from. Sophie's surgery was a success. The doctors said she'd make a full recovery. James spent every day at the hospital during those first weeks, holding her hand, telling her stories about his life before she was born, stories he'd never shared because they hurt too much to remember. She cried when he told her about her mother, about the accident, about the choice he'd made to give up music for her. Dad, I never knew, she whispered from her hospital bed. All those years I thought you were just a caretaker. I didn't know what you'd sacrificed. You were never a sacrifice, James told her firmly. You were the reason I kept going. Everything I did because I loved you. Now, standing backstage at Carnegie Hall, James could hear the murmur of the crowd through the heavy curtain. Every seat was sold out. Over 2,000 people had come to hear the return of James Chen after 30 years of silence. His hands were shaking again. Not from nerves this time, from anticipation. From the sheer weight of this moment, Mrs. Vasquez appeared beside him. She looked elegant in her evening gown, a press badge hanging around her neck. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," James admitted. "Good, that means it matters." She squeezed his shoulder. "They're going to love you, just like they did before." Through a gap in the curtain, James could see Sophie sitting in the front row. She'd insisted on coming, despite still recovering. Beside her sat Vincent, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo. He caught James looking and gave an awkward thumbs up. James smiled. Vincent had changed over the past 3 months. Really changed. Not the performative kind of change that looked good for cameras. The hard kind. The kind that meant looking at yourself honestly and not liking what you saw. The foundation was real. The James Chen Foundation for Artists in Need. Vincent had put in $20 million to start. They'd already helped 15 people. A painter who'd become a construction worker. A writer who'd been driving trucks. A dancer who'd been waiting tables. People who'd buried their talents to survive just like James had. Vincent ran it personally. He interviewed every applicant himself, listened to their stories. James had watched him tear up more than once during those conversations. The cocky billionaire was learning what it meant to see people as people, not as numbers or opportunities. The foundation paid living wages, covered health insurance, provided studio space, equipment, whatever the artist needed, and in return they just had to create, to share their gifts with the world, to teach others. James had his own studio now. A beautiful space with 3 grand pianos and windows overlooking the city. He taught there twice a week. Young students, old students, anyone who wanted to learn. He charged nothing. The foundation covered everything. 5 minutes, Mr. Chen, a stage manager whispered. James nodded. He walked to the mirror and looked at himself. He was wearing a suit for the first time in decades. His hair was neatly trimmed, but his hands were still rough from years of work. He'd never lose those calluses completely. He didn't want to. Those rough hands reminded him of where he'd been, what he'd survived. They told a story that was just as important as the music he was about to play. The stage manager led him to his position. The curtain was still down. On the other side, he could hear the crowd settling. Programs rustling. People finding their seats. James closed his eyes and thought about the piano in the Rosewood Hotel lobby. That dusty old Steinway that had changed everything. Vincent had insisted they restore it. It now sat in the foundation's main hall, available for anyone to play. A plaque beside it told the story of what happened that afternoon. The lights dimmed. The crowd went silent. James took one last deep breath. The curtain rose. The applause was immediate and thunderous. A standing ovation before he'd played a single note. James walked to the piano, overwhelmed. He bowed, then sat on the bench, adjusted it slightly, placed his hands over the keys, and then he played. He started with Chopin, a nocturne, soft and gentle, the kind of piece that felt like a conversation between old friends. The acoustics in Carnegie Hall were perfect. Every note rang clear and true. Then he moved to Beethoven. Powerful, dramatic, full of emotion. His hands remembered everything. Every fingering, every dynamic, every subtle shift in tempo. It was like he'd never stopped playing. The audience was completely silent. Not even a cough. James poured everything into the music. 30 years of pain and loss and quiet dignity. The love for his daughter. The gratitude for a second chance. The hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to be who he was meant to be. He finished with Rachmaninoff, the same piece he'd played in the hotel lobby. But this time it was different. This time he wasn't proving anything to anyone. He was just sharing something beautiful with people who wanted to hear it. The final note faded. The silence held for one perfect moment. Then the crowd erupted. People jumped to their feet, clapping, cheering, some crying openly. The ovation lasted 5 minutes, then 10. James stood and bowed, tears streaming down his face. He looked at Sophie in the front row. She was sobbing, her hands pressed to her mouth. Vincent had an arm around her shoulders, and he was crying too. Mrs. Vasquez was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. James played 2 encores before they finally let him leave the stage. Backstage, he was surrounded immediately. Reporters wanting interviews. Old colleagues he hadn't seen in decades. Young musicians asking for advice. But he pushed through them all to find Sophie. She threw her arms around him, holding tight. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," she whispered. "Mom would be too." "I wish she could have been here," James said. "She was. I felt her. In the music." Vincent approached them awkwardly, hanging back until James waved him over. "That was incredible," Vincent said. "I mean, I knew you were good from the hotel, but that was something else entirely." "Thank you," James said. "For all of this. I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. You gave me my life back." Vincent shook his head. "You gave me something more important. You taught me what a life should look like, what it means to be a decent person." They were interrupted by Mrs. Vasquez and a dozen other critics and musicians. They wanted to take James to dinner to celebrate. But James was exhausted in the best possible way. "Tomorrow," he promised. "Tonight, I just want to spend time with my daughter." The crowd dispersed, though many lingered to shake his hand one more time. Vincent stayed behind with them. "There's something I want to show you," Vincent said. He pulled out his phone and opened a video. This went up about an hour ago. It was a news segment. The anchor was talking about the concert, about James's comeback story. But then the video switched to footage from 3 months ago, the moment in the hotel lobby. "Remember this?" Vincent asked. "Remember when I was the most hated person on the internet?" James winced. "I try not to think about that." "I do," Vincent said. "Every day. Because it reminds me of who I don't want to be." He scrolled to the comments section. Thousands of them. "This is the most beautiful redemption story I've ever seen. From mockery to mentorship, faith in humanity restored. Both of these men are heroes. One for his grace, one for his growth. This is what real change looks like." Vincent locked his phone. People don't forget, but they do forgive. If you show them you mean it. If you actually change, Sophie smiled. "So what now? You've had your big comeback concert. What's next?" James thought about it. "I want to do more teaching. The foundation is helping artists, but we could do more for kids. Inner city kids who can't afford lessons. Kids like I was before I had opportunities." "Done," Vincent said immediately. "I'll fund it. We'll call it the Sophie Chen Music Program." Sophie laughed. "Don't name it after me. Name it after someone who deserves it." "You do deserve it," James said. "You're the reason any of this exists. The reason I survived. The reason I became the person I am." They left Carnegie Hall together, the three of them. An unlikely family formed from a moment of cruelty that transformed into grace. The street outside was packed with fans waiting for autographs. James signed programs, took pictures, thanked people for coming. Vincent stood to the side, watching. Not the center of attention for once. Just supporting someone else's moment. Learning to be comfortable in the background. As they finally made their way to the car, James turned back to look at Carnegie Hall. The marquee still lit up with his name. He'd dreamed of seeing that sign again when he was young. Then he'd spent 30 years telling himself the dream was dead. But dreams don't die. Not really. They just wait. Sometimes for years. Sometimes for decades. Waiting for the right moment to wake up again. "Thank you," James said quietly, to no one in particular. To his wife, who couldn't be there. To Vincent, who gave him a chance. To Sophie, who gave him purpose. To the universe for letting an old caretaker play a dusty piano one more time. And the universe, in its infinite wisdom, seemed to answer back. Sometimes the end is just a new beginning. Sometimes mockery leads to grace. Sometimes a cruel joke becomes the first line of a redemption story. And sometimes, just sometimes, all you need is one moment. One chance to show the world who you really are. James Chen got his moment. And he made it count.